When historians rank the most culturally extreme civilizations in human history, one society sits at the absolute top of that list. Every single scholar who studied Norse culture comes to the same horrifying conclusion. There has never been a more systematically oppressive, more religiously twisted approach to personal autonomy than what existed in Viking society. But you don't know the real story. What you've been told about noble Norse warriors and proud shield maidens is a carefully sanitized myth designed to hide the brutal reality that powered Viking civilization for over 300 years. The Vikings didn't just raid monasteries, they created the most sophisticated human control systems in medieval Europe, institutionalized personal autonomy violations as religious duty, and developed social programs that would make modern dictatorships sick. What I'm about to show you will destroy every romantic notion you've ever had about Viking culture. These weren't noble warriors following an honor code. They were systematic oppressors with boats. What if I told you that Viking religious law required married women to participate in ceremonial partnerships with multiple strangers as acts of worship, and refusing could get your entire family exiled? It's March 15th, 876 AD in Kaupang, Norway. Astrid Eriksdottir, a 19-year-old mother, sits weeping as her husband prepares her for the Dísablót festival. Tonight, she'll fulfill ceremonial roles with 7 different men chosen by temple priests, and any reluctance will mark her children as cursed. These weren't isolated pagan rituals. The Dísablót ceremonies were legally mandated religious festivals occurring 3 times yearly across the Norse world. The Icelandic Landnámabók mentions these frith-weaving ceremonies, using language that academic translators have deliberately softened for centuries. Every married woman aged 15 to 40 was required to participate in ritual partnerships lasting up to 9 days. The men were selected through elaborate ceremonies involving combat, divination, and payments to temple authorities. Temple priests maintained detailed records of bloodlines and physical traits to ensure the ceremonies would produce children with desired characteristics. The preparation rituals broke down psychological resistance. Women were bathed in sacred springs mixed with mind-altering herbs, dressed in white burial shrouds symbolizing death of individual identity, and forced to consume fermented substances containing natural sedatives. Archaeological evidence from Uppsala reveals sophisticated infrastructure built for these ceremonies. Large rectangular buildings with dozens of small chambers connected by corridors. Architectural features that only make sense as facilities for organized ceremonial rotations. The social pressure was calculated and brutal. Families refusing participation faced immediate exile and could be declared nidi, a legal status making them targets for violence. Children born 9 months after ceremonies were considered blessed regardless of uncertain paternity. But what most people don't realize is how these festivals functioned as political weapons. Chieftains would invite enemies to participate, knowing that forcing rival men to share their wives created permanent psychological dominance through ritualized humiliation. If you think ritualized sharing was extreme, wait until you hear about their systematic approach to human lineage control. Picture this. It's 982 AD in Reykjavik, and a ship returns from Ireland carrying 200 captured women aged 12 to 25. These aren't random captives. They've been selected using written checklists specifying physical measurements and regional characteristics. Welcome to the most systematic human control program in medieval history. Vikings called female captives ambátt, but these weren't ordinary servants. They were human resources in facilities operating with factory farm efficiency and laboratory calculation. DNA analysis reveals 80% of founding Icelandic females were Celtic captives, while 80% of males were Norse, a genetic pattern only possible through systematic control. Viking raiding parties carried detailed instructions on capture preferences. The Orkneyinga saga mentions selection scrolls specifying physical traits, regional origins, and personality characteristics that buyers wanted in their human resources. Celtic women were prized for smaller bone structure and lighter colouring. Saxon women were valued for perceived intelligence and domestic skills. Frankish women were sought for height and strength. Each group was assigned to different programs with specific genetic goals. Archaeological excavations reveal massive rectangular buildings with individual cells barely large enough for lying down. Carbon dating suggests these housed hundreds of women for decades. The breeding schedules were planned with scientific precision, with temple priests maintaining genealogical records, tracking bloodlines across generations. Medical analysis of skeletal remains shows evidence of deliberate nutritional control designed to optimize reproductive function. Women received specific diets during pregnancy, but were systematically undernourished otherwise to prevent them growing too strong for control. Children faced complex hierarchies. Those inheriting Norse traits might be adopted into free families after permanent separation from mothers before age 5. Those resembling captive mothers remained enslaved but could earn elevated status through exceptional service. The economic scale was staggering. Single expeditions could capture resources worth thousands of cattle. Entire expeditions were financed based on projected program profits calculated over decades, but the control programs were just infrastructure. The real horror was what happened when people violated Viking social codes. Did you know the infamous Blood Eagle execution was combined with ritual humiliations so extreme that medieval chroniclers refused to document them? This wasn't just punishment, it was spiritual annihilation designed to destroy both body and soul. Copenhagen, October 12, 867 AD. King Ella hangs dying in a monastery courtyard, his ribs spread like wings. But history books omit what Vikings did during the 3 hours before the cutting began. The Chronicle of the Kings of Alba describes Ella's execution in clinical detail, but uses Latin phrases so disturbing that copyists systematically removed them from later manuscripts. Modern historians have reconstructed these passages, revealing practices combining execution with spiritual degradation beyond comprehension. Blood Eagle wasn't about killing enemies, it was about soul destruction. Norse theology taught that dying in shame prevented warrior entry into Valhalla, condemning them to eternal servitude. By degrading victims before killing them, Vikings believed they were damning enemies' souls while empowering their gods. The rituals began with forced consumption of mind-altering substances, keeping victims conscious but preventing effective resistance. Archaeological analysis reveals residues of ergot alkaloids at Viking ceremonial grounds. These weren't just military executions. Vikings applied them to anyone violating Norse codes. Women refusing marriage assignments, slaves resisting programs, even Viking men showing insufficient aggression could face ultimate punishment. The ceremonies were public spectacles, requiring community attendance. Entire populations gathered to witness executions lasting hours, with attendance mandatory, families refusing to watch faced accusations of disloyalty. Selection was calculated for maximum impact. Kings, priests, and military leaders were preferred because their degradation demonstrated complete powerlessness of followers and absolute Viking dominance. The Kogad Gaidel describes aftermath in Ireland. Women wept for 3 days, not for the dead king, but knowing no shame was too great for Norse devils to inflict. But Blood Eagle was what Vikings did to enemies. Imagine what they considered acceptable for their own people. There was a time when Viking law gave men legal rights to enter women's bedrooms at night and attempt romantic advances, with women facing severe penalties for refusing these courtship methods. The practice was nattheimsøken, night visits, enshrined in legal codes as legitimate marriage negotiation. But the reality was systematic coercion disguised as romantic tradition. Roskilde, Denmark, spring 1034 AD. 16-year-old Thora lies awake listening for footsteps. 3 different men have declared intentions to make night visits, and Norse law prohibits barricading doors or seeking protection. Tonight, one will enter, and her response determines her fate. The Gragas law code devotes entire sections to night visit regulations. A man successfully completing a visit without violent repulsion could claim the woman as intended bride. If she refused, she faced accusations of being defective, cursed, or unnaturally resistant to male authority. The social pressure made resistance impossible. Screaming risked family shame for failing to raise a daughter properly. Remaining silent meant gratitude was expected. Successfully fighting off intruders earned mockery as unfeminine and aggressive. Men spent days scouting targets, noting family schedules and house layouts. The Laxdæla saga describes techniques taught to young Norse men. Enter when moon is dark, move silently as hunting wolf, speak first in whispers. Night visits were weapons in blood feuds. Enemy men could target rival families' daughters, knowing successful visits permanently damaged opponents' honor. It was warfare conducted through personal violation. The practice created shadow economies. Professional guards protected wealthy daughters, while others guided suitors through complex social rules. Some operated what modern terminology would recognize as trafficking networks. High-status men could conduct visits with impunity, while women had no legal recourse regardless of social position. The legal consequences extended beyond immediate participants. Successful visits created binding family obligations affecting generations. But night visits were considered gentle courtship compared to the competitions determining mating rights. Imagine discovering your marriage partner would be determined by watching warriors fight to the death while engaging in violent displays of dominance. Hunatak, woman-taking, competitions combined ritualized combat with public displays to determine mating rights among Viking elites. These weren't symbolic contests, but life-or-death battles where prizes were permanent ownership of women with no voice in proceedings. Trondheim, Norway, midsummer, 985 AD. Jarl Hakon's longhouse echoes with 12 berserkers competing for 16-year-old Sigrid Thorsdottir. Warriors have consumed fly-agaric mushrooms for 3 days, working into battle trances, but tonight their violence targets reproductive dominance demonstrations. Berserkers fasted for days while consuming mind-altering substances. They smeared themselves with bear grease, wolf blood, and human ash, believing this gave supernatural strength. Some carved ritual scars to demonstrate pain tolerance and divine selection. Competitions didn't just involve physical combat. Berserkers demonstrated prowess through public acts with designated thralls, while maintaining aggressive postures and consuming alcohol. Audiences judged both fighting skills and intimate performance, with victory requiring excellence in both areas. Selection criteria revealed Viking genetic superiority concepts. Berserkers competed for women from bloodlines producing strong children, skilled crafters, or supernatural abilities. Competitions were genetic selection disguised as religious ceremonies, with genealogical records determining worthy prizes. Winners immediately claimed prizes through public ceremonies, combining marriage with ceremonial consummation. Women were expected to demonstrate enthusiasm regardless of feelings, with insufficient gratitude resulting in rejection and permanent exile. Competitions served as army recruitment tools. Young men aspired to berserker status, partly for mating privileges, creating incentives for extreme violence while channeling aggression towards socially approved targets. Winners gained absolute authority over prizes including disposal rights through sale, trade, or inheritance. Losers faced exile, enslavement, or execution, depending on how violently they contested results. But berserker competitions were considered honorable displays compared to the public humiliation ceremonies used to destroy unwanted marriages. You won't believe what Vikings did to people seeking divorce. Public humiliation rituals so extreme that rejected spouses often preferred death to surviving systematic destruction of their social identity. Skilnader med skam, divorce with shame, was considered necessary to prevent rejected spouses seeking revenge through violence or sorcery. These weren't legal proceedings but community entertainment combining marriage dissolution with complete reputation annihilation. Bergen, Norway, September 3rd, 1087 AD. Ragnhild stands exposed in the town court, while husband Bjorn recites detailed catalogues of her alleged failures. 300 community members witness her degradation in proceedings lasting 2 days until every aspect of her private life has been exposed for neighbor entertainment. Preparation lasted months as initiating spouses gathered evidence and witnesses. Norse law required specific justifications, including incompetence, infidelity, cowardice, forbidden magic practice, or failure producing children. Evidence gathering involved private details revealed publicly during ceremonies. Testimony wasn't limited to general accusations. Witnesses provided explicit descriptions of alleged problems, detailed infidelity accounts, and public examinations of physical defects. Accused spouses stood exposed while strangers discussed their bodies in clinical detail. Women accused of infidelity faced physical examinations by community elders, verifying their history through invasive procedures performed before assembled crowds. Men accused of incompetence demonstrated abilities with designated partners, while communities judged performance. Ceremonies were designed as entertainment. Community members placed bets on outcomes. Vendors sold food to spectators. Musicians provided accompaniment to dramatic moments. Children attended as educational experiences about marital failure consequences. Economic consequences were devastating. Rejected spouses lost property rights, children and social connections, while becoming responsible for alleged damages. Families often disowned them, avoiding shame association, and former friends refused dealings fearing social contamination. Psychological impact was often permanent and fatal. The Eagles saga mentions individuals who never spoke again and describes elaborate ending-of-life rituals performed by people preferring death to permanent stigma. Children faced systematic punishment, rejected by extended families and struggling to find marriage partners due to family shame association. Some were adopted by distant relatives, changing names and identities, escaping stigma. But shame divorce ceremonies were considered merciful compared to systematic programs Vikings imposed on their youngest members. Vikings had systematic training programs preparing youngest community members for adult roles through methods considered essential education, but which modern standards would classify as organized conditioning. Ungmenna Kensla, youth instruction, began at age 12 for both genders. These weren't gentle ceremonies, but intensive systems designed to break individual identity and rebuild young people as functional Viking culture components. Stavanger, Norway, 1043 AD. 12-year-old Astrid has been separated from family and taken to communal halls, supervised by older women who survived their own preparation programs. For 4 years, she'll undergo daily instruction in adult role expectations, compliance training, and psychological conditioning, eliminating resistance to authority. Programs for young women were particularly systematic. They were housed in specialized facilities existing in every major settlement, with dormitory buildings accommodating dozens under constant supervision. Curriculum included detailed adult role instruction, compliance training through graduated conditioning, and programming suppressing individual desires favoring authority preferences. Training wasn't theoretical. Young people learned expected behaviors through practice sessions with designated partners under supervision, with performance evaluated by instructors maintaining detailed progress records. Psychological conditioning was equally intensive. Students memorized behavioral codes governing future relationships, learned suppressing emotions favoring authority, and practiced submission techniques through increasingly realistic role-playing exercises. Instruction for young men focused on dominance and control rather than mutual respect. They learned viewing women as property requiring management, with training, including intimidation instruction, emotional manipulation, and strategic violence use, maintaining relationship authority. Religious justification drew on Norse gender role beliefs portraying proper relationships as hierarchical structures with men as natural leaders and women as willing followers. Instructors used mythology reinforcing concepts through divine precedent stories. Graduation ceremonies marked adult status transition through elaborate public skill demonstrations, combining testing with community entertainment. Young men demonstrated dominance over designated partners, while young women showed graceful submission to male authority. Social consequences of failure were severe. Those unable to master required skills faced lifelong lower status, marriage exclusion, menial labor assignment, or exile if failures threatened community stability. Programs served multiple functions beyond individual preparation, creating shared experiences, bonding age cohorts, reinforcing cultural values through systematic indoctrination, providing structured pathways to adult responsibilities, and maintaining systematic culture Vikings believed essential for survival. But preparation programs were foundation for the ultimate Viking institution, reducing women to prizes in battles between dead husbands' relatives. When Viking men died, their widows didn't gain freedom. They became prizes in brutal competitions between male relatives fighting for rights to inherit women along with property and livestock. Ekkjuarfer, widow inheritance, was considered essential for maintaining family wealth and bloodline purity. Wealthy Viking deaths triggered elaborate battles between sons, brothers, and cousins competing for widow claims, along with land and possessions, through contests combining legal proceedings with ritualized violence. Uppsala, Sweden, October 27, 947 AD. Recently deceased Jarl Gunnar's longhouse still echoes with mourning, but funeral pyres barely cool before 6 male relatives begin violent competition to inherit 23-year-old widow Thurid, along with her substantial resources. Battles will last 3 days while Thurid spends time chained in storage awaiting fate determination. Legal frameworks classified widows as inherited property with specific values based on age, health, fertility, social connections, and remaining reproductive years. Young widows with living children commanded highest inheritance prices, while older or childless women became secondary prizes or household management assignments. Competition began immediately after deaths, often before funeral completion. Male relatives assessed inheritance and declared intentions regarding assets, including widows. The Heimskringla describes these as bloodline councils, where family members negotiated, threatened, and fought, determining distribution through day-long contests. Battles weren't just physical combat. Competitors demonstrated ownership worthiness through public dominance displays, while widows watched from designated areas, knowing their future comfort depended on which man emerged victorious from degrading spectacles. Religious justification drew on afterlife beliefs and family continuity. Vikings believed proper inheritance of all assets, including women, was necessary for deceased spiritual welfare and continued bloodline protection. Improperly inherited widows might become restless spirits, haunting homes or bringing supernatural misfortune. Practical implications were devastating. Widows had no voice determining fates and no legal refusal rights. The Laxdæla saga mentions widows enjoying comfortable marriages, finding themselves claimed by abusive relatives treating them as servants rather than family. Economic calculations were coldly practical. Widows came with resources, property rights, and social connections, significantly enhancing men's wealth and status, while representing ongoing obligations and potential conflict sources. Inheritance battles were business negotiations conducted through violence. Social dynamics created devastating hierarchies. Widows inherited by wealthy, powerful men might maintain status, while those claimed by poor relatives faced immediate reduction to near slavery. Some widows were divided between multiple inheritors, creating shared custody arrangements, treating them exactly like livestock. Children faced complex identity issues. Sons from previous marriages competed with new half-brothers for inheritance, while struggling knowing their mothers became property. Daughters became bargaining chips in negotiations between birth father's relatives and mother's new owners. Age factors created particularly disturbing scenarios. Young widows might be inherited by elderly relatives, viewing them as caretakers, while elderly widows might be claimed by young men seeking wealth control, with personal aspects secondary to economic benefits. Psychological impact was severe and permanent. They lived in constant uncertainty, knowing husbands' deaths would trigger competitions for their bodies and loyalty. Many developed survival strategies involving emotional detachment and calculated submission to emerging owners. These 8 practices reveal the horrifying truth about Viking culture. It wasn't about noble warriors following honor codes, but systematic civilization built on personal autonomy violations, human control systems, and complete elimination of individual rights in service of male-dominated power structures. What makes these practices truly horrifying is their complete integration into every aspect of Viking society, from religious festivals mandating ceremonial sharing to control programs treating humans as experimental resources, all legally mandated, religiously blessed, and socially celebrated for 3 centuries as essential Norse identity elements. Today, we romanticize Viking culture through media, focusing exclusively on warrior achievements while completely ignoring the oppressive systems sustaining their society. Remember these practices when seeing heroic Viking portrayals, because behind the longships and battle axes was a culture designed to traumatize, control, and exploit vulnerable society members while calling it honor, tradition, and divine will.